OpenMRS is an open-source medical record system. It is a free software which allows medical workers to electronically store and track patients' medical case information. OpenMRS is a Java-based program which allows for modules similar to add-ons for Firefox, making OpenMRS highly customizable. It is implemented around the world, often in developing countries. OpenMRS promotes greater healthcare through health informatics, saving lives through programming. How did OpenMRS get started? In the 90s, AMPATH model was working. People were realizing that health data management was key to making AMPATH model work, so that drug treatments were not misused.
The AMPATH project was started in the 90s, and they quickly realized in the early 2000s, I think it might have been in 2000, that drugs really were helping patients, but if you didn't take the drugs, it had a overly detrimental effect. So the key to giving good patient care was having good data around the patients and being able to keep track of them and knowing what they're on, et cetera, et cetera.
While AIDS cases were growing, people were realizing a greater need for a better medical record system. Paul and Burke would need to adapt the MMRS, or Masoriot Medical Record System. Only MMRS couldn't handle the expanding patient load.
Then the HIV clinic is scaling up, and they have now thousands of patients. And they're like, "Well, we're getting grants to help us, fund this and make this project move forward. We need some way to keep track of all the data." And instead of just rolling it from scratch, hey, there's this Access database that Bill made for this project, the MMRS. Let's just adapt that and kind of twist it how we need to make it work for our HIV clinic and keeping track of those patients.
Beginning of the first OpenMRS data model. Burke and Paul decided it would be easier to start from scratch, so they drafted their own vocabulary-based medical record system while in Kenya.
We knew we wanted to have a vocabulary-based system and something Regenstrief-like, but we really couldn't get our hands around the full Regenstrief system. And so little old us, we sat down in the room while we were in Kenya that week and said, well, we're just going to have to make one. So we'll make an EMR. And so we started designing it. Paul was sitting on his bed. I was on my bed in our little room. And we're like, well, we'll need a patient table. We'll need an observation table. So we just started inventing the tables. And he was actually using Access to design the tables.
To mock up the design.
And so we started doing that. And we came back after that week in Kenya. And we had arranged to both be 10% of our time working on this project to try to build it out. And Clem, who was our mentor and the head of Regenstrief at the time, said, "You guys are idiots. You can't do this. This is impossible." And he was right. And so, but that wasn't going to stop us because, you see people are dying over there. People are dying. So we set about trying to get vocabulary together, to build out the data model. We would go to Nothing But Noodles, would have lunch and just talk through.
With the memory of AIDS patients' needs still fresh in their minds, Paul and Burke returned to Indianapolis while working with the Regenstrief Institute, and they spent about 10% of their time developing their new medical record system. Burke and Paul went to a medical informatics conference later in 2004, where through mutual friend Terry Hannon, they met Hamish Frazier from Partners in Health. There in San Francisco, they spoke in a diner and realized that Paul and Burke were working towards a mutual goal as Hamish and Partners in Health to build a competent medical record system. Why not work together and pool efforts?
It was that fall that we were at AMIA at the National Informatics Conference, and we chanced into Terry Hannon and said, "Hey, there's a guy you guys need to meet." And Terry, who was involved early with Bill making the MRS and converting it over for the HIV system. And so he said, "There's this guy, Hamish Frazier, who works with Partners in Health. They're doing stuff in the same area. You really need to talk to this guy." And so we sat down, and San Francisco was where AMIA was at.
This little diner.
Little diner, I think Lori's Diner.
Lori's Diner.
After this conference, Paul and Burke further developed their data models for their medical record system.
We have this experience, let's build up a Java-based system, web-based.
And they were running into some problems with their older system as well.
Yeah, and so they...
Sound familiar?
Yeah, so essentially we were just sitting in there saying, okay, you guys are going to be in Rwanda building a Java-based system to meet the needs of HIV care, and we're modeling out and have done all this thought working on the system in Kenya. Why don't we pool our efforts? And so that was the getting to maybe moment.
They decided it was time to name their medical record system. Paul came up with the OpenMRS name, Burke bought the OpenMRS web domain that night.
We've put a lot of effort in this, but the truth is, we think, working together, this could be something, this would be a better way to go. So throw rocks at it if you think that there's ways you want to affect it. We're open to that, and so be engaged. And they came in fully started like, okay, this I can live with this, I can live with this, but for our drugs we need to do more here, and it was a give and take, and that was it was a very productive and a great kind of mesh in the first day. And I remember the second day we came in and we said, well, we really should pull this together. We should really make this a true collaboration and work on this together. And let's see, we had the RMRS here, the Regan Street Medical Record System. We had the Masoriat Medical Record System, or MMRS, that Bill had done. And we had called or thought of ours as the AMPATH Medical Record System, so AMRS. And so we had all these MRSs out there. And so Paul said, well, what about OpenMRS? And I said, interesting that you should think about that. And I pulled up and I had that night bought the domain for OpenMRS.
OpenMRS was open from its very beginnings. To work together with partners in health in Boston in developing OpenMRS, the code was shared publicly online for easy, fast collaboration between Indianapolis and Boston.
From the very beginning, there was no sense of like, we're going to make an open source community. It was, we're going to work together, we're academics, we're just going to be open about it. We had already kind of set up mailing lists from the beginning, even working with the AMPATH stuff before we even met the partners and health guys.
We already had a wiki.
We were putting it on, we had an open wiki, and we were doing it that way, just because it's easier when someone says, hey, what are you guys doing about this? You just send them a link, point them to it. It was just more convenient to do it openly, and then we had nothing to hide.
It was open because that was the quickest way towards sharing.
The idea to use OpenMRS anywhere around the world was suggested, and so at a meeting during the summer of 2005 in Eldoret, Kenya, OpenMRS was unveiled, warts and all, to a group of developers. People saw its flaws and needs for improvement, but saw its overall potential. This was an eye-opening for Burke and Paul, as they realized that their small project could actually be built up to help a large amount of patients around the world.
So we had that meeting, and it was in Eldoret, in Kenya, and Paul and I were both, basically our attitude was, okay, fine. We're going to show them we're going to show them the system, and we're going to show how it doesn't run, and how you have to basically have to change the laws of physics to get it to actually boot up, and
it was not in a happy state.
It was not in a happy state, but you could get it running enough that it kind of existed, and so, but instead of trying to sell it or anything, it was the exact opposite. It was let's show all our warts, and they will go running as fast as they can, and they will say, no way. So we did. We unveiled, they had the docs and other data folk in one room, and were working on forms. And we were back with talking to the developers. And we showed them this system, warts and all. And much to our dismay, instead of saying, oh, you guys built a total piece of junk, we don't want to touch it, they looked at it and they said, okay, yeah, sure, that doesn't work, but the data model and what you've done here, we could really build on that. And it was this sudden awareness of, oh my God, this thing could actually
do something.
OpenMRS went live in Kenya on Valentine's Day 2006.
That was through 2005, and it was by early 2006 we had a system up and running, and we installed it
Valentine's Day,
to the dismay of our wives at or girlfriends, on Valentine's Day in 2006. So we're in Kenya.
OpenMRS hired its first programmers and developed into an LLC and issued the OpenMRS public license, officially developing into an open source community. OpenMRS heard about Google Summer of Code. Here, Google supplied summer scholarships to programming students to work for open source programs. Through this, OpenMRS developed with the aid of student programmers and in turn could mentor these students. Google helped OpenMRS grow.
So are we going to step away from writing code and getting other people to write code, or are we going to kind of stick with what we're doing? And I think everyone pretty much decided that we would try helping others, teach them how to work on top of the platform.
But it really forced us to say, okay, what if someone came to this, to this website or to this OpenMRS thing that wasn't us. What would they see and what would they think? And like we have to have a list of projects, and what the website is no longer just where we throw stuff. It's like now it actually should probably say something useful to somebody. So it really was, I think, that turning point where we started. Our heads went from
externally
from just
focused.
Collaborating to, oh wow, this is an open source platform.
We're a real project.
Yeah, we actually exist.
Even though Google's contribution was pretty small, it was pretty massive in terms of how it got us to think differently about stuff. So I think we feel pretty grateful to Google, not because of money, but because of just their support.
The staff of OpenMRS began laying down their core characteristics of their organization. What values were most important to them?
Change, and we thought, well, here's a perfect topic to do for the conference: was transformational change through community and collaboration. And so we started to sit down and say, well, how can we tell our story and kind of talk, how did we get where we are? And part of that process started us, I think, in the slides, we started thinking through what really matters to us, what are our values? And that was really, I think, the first time that we explicitly laid down kind of what our values are, and we made a presentation that included a bunch of things like active transparency, the notion of not just sharing something, but showing your flaws, being willing to show your flaws, and being a community, and being being free and trying to build up capacity, let people do things, focused on care, avoiding imagined needs, so that we had learned the lesson early on of we could dream up all the possible solutions we could do, but what we learned was the most effective was actually look in front of you, what is the clinician, what is the person complaining about, and solve that problem.
Only build that.
You can, it became one where let's try to plan ahead, think ahead, but only really start attacking the things that need to be attacked.
OpenMRS was asked to implement their program countrywide in Rwanda, but they said no. The importance was to have Rwandan medical and IT staff implement OpenMRS themselves. OpenMRS and Partners in Health worked to train Rwandan staff so that they could use the OpenMRS program independently.
In my mind, when I talk about our values and where we came from and what matters, I always think of our response to Rwanda when Rwanda got to the point that they said, okay, we've seen this system, we want to roll it out, and we want it to be countrywide. Help us do that, and do this for us, implement this. And our response was no. And the response was, instead of give us a bunch of money and we'll do this for you, it was, you get some developers together, we'll set up, and PIH really took this on, but that PIH said, we will train developers, we'll put them through a school on OpenMRS and get them capable of doing it, and then you can seed them. And I think that response was very much one of, I feel like, the right way to do things, where it's not, we'll create, things so that you're dependent on us. And it wasn't that we're even selling anything. It was, we'll help you help yourselves. And I think that's the kind of thing that I'm proud of with OpenMRS.
Currently in 2012, after 8 years, the future of OpenMRS is still being defined. OpenMRS has transitioned into a formal nonprofit organization and is looking to connect and engage more with the community as well as with other organizations.
Yeah, I think the future is still being defined, and there's several ways that can go, but that's actually something that the OpenMRS leadership group is working on too, because since it is a collaborative, we obviously have different opinions, different strengths based on the organizations or individuals who are contributing to it. So now it's a matter of taking all of that, now that we have this formal entity, and agreeing on what that's going to look like and how it's going to function, but also too how it's going to interact with organizations outside of OpenMRS, whether that be governmental agencies, different organizations that want to use OpenMRS, but also funders.
In 8 more years, in 2020, where will OpenMRS be?
So we're 8 years into this crazy idea.
Yeah.
Thinking forward 8 years,
Yeah.
2020.
I have a clear vision of 2020.
What would be both your hope, where you'd love to see things, and your biggest worry for this whole idea of this whole notion of OpenMRS, whatever it becomes?
Yeah, I mean, I think the fundamental, kind of the biggest hope is that is that this process and creating a platform is enabling and allows, developing countries to more efficiently and more effectively, promote care and spread, and that I don't have any kind of notion that like OpenMRS would like become the thing used everywhere. I'm not sure that there's a one-size-fits-all or that even would necessarily be a good thing. But if there is to some extent that a shared platform has really been taken on and it's enabled more people, because we have a vision of in terms of like fixing the UI up and making it more adaptable. That if we really got to a second version of the API, had our next iteration on things, that we could have a level of flexibility and ease of use that we haven't quite obtained yet, that more and more adoption, not so much because I want to see a lot of people adopt it, but in my mind that sense that if there's somebody who's just trying to run a clinic somewhere in Botswana and they need some help, and here's a system that can help them, that's within reach, and they can make it work for them. And so my hope, the biggest hope, is that this process, wherever it is, and by 2020 has made enough of a difference that's been enabling for folks.
For more information, check out the following links.